The Walker estate stood like a silent monument to loss. Nestled just outside Atlanta's wealthiest neighborhoods, it was the kind of place that seemed too perfect to house sorrow. White columns stretched up toward the sky like grieving arms, and immaculate hedges framed the wide, sweeping lawn. But inside, behind the heavy oak doors and polished marble floors, the sound of a baby's cries shattered the illusion of peace. Evelyn Walker, just 3 months old, wailed with a desperation that made the windows rattle. Her crib, carved from antique walnut and hand-painted with cherubs, offered no comfort. Her tiny face flushed with exhaustion, her limbs jerked in frantic rhythm. The nursery, lavender-scented, sun-drenched, sterile, felt like a stage for a tragedy no one wanted to watch. Downstairs, the house staff moved quietly, their eyes lowered. Since the death of Mrs. Caroline Walker during childbirth complications, the mansion had sunk into a heavy silence. Daniel Walker, once a celebrated real estate magnate gracing magazine covers with his charismatic smile, had retreated behind his office door, rarely speaking, barely looking at his daughter. That morning, Amara Johnson stood at the base of the staircase, holding a freshly folded stack of linens. She paused, listening to the baby's cries drift down from above. Her jaw tensed. The sound triggered something deep in her chest, something primal, painful, and impossible to ignore. She shouldn't have been there. Not really. Amara had been hired on a temporary basis, a replacement housekeeper filling in during staff shortages. She didn't belong in homes like this, homes with chandeliers the size of minivans and art worth more than her entire family had earned in 3 generations. Still, she climbed the stairs. The nursery door was ajar. Inside, the lead nanny, a young woman named Kristen with trembling hands and a pale face, was trying to coax Evelyn with a bottle. "She won't take it," Kristen muttered, her voice frayed with frustration. "She hasn't eaten since midnight. I don't know what to do anymore. I need to step out." Before Amara could respond, Kristen shoved the bottle into her hands and left the room. Amara stared down at the squirming infant. Evelyn's cries had grown weaker now, more whimpers than wails, but they still held a desperate rhythm that cut into Amara's core. She knelt beside the crib and gently scooped the baby into her arms. Evelyne's body felt too light, too fragile. Her skin was warm with exertion. Her tiny mouth opened again, searching. Amara tried the bottle, but the baby pushed it away with a trembling fist. Milk dripped uselessly onto the blanket. Amara sat in the rocking chair, cradling the child. She rocked slowly, murmuring soft nonsense into the baby's ear. She knew this rhythm. Her body remembered it, even if her heart screamed against it. 3 months ago, almost to the day, Amara had given birth to a baby boy, Micah. He'd lived exactly 6 days. Si long, beautiful, torturudes. Afterward, the doctors had told her what no mother ever wants to hear: "We did everything we could." Her body, however, hadn't gotten the message. It had continued producing milk for weeks. And even now, even after counseling, prayer and grief support groups, she still leaked at night. She still woke with a soaked shirt and arms that reached for a child no longer there. Now she held Evelyn. A stranger's child. A baby who needed more than a sterile crib and a bottle she wouldn't accept. Amara s'en trembled. She glanced at the door. Then at the baby. Evelyn's mouth opened and closed again in a silent plea. "I'm so sorry," Amara whispered. "I don't know if this is right. But I can't let you suffer." With slow, deliberate motions, she unbuttoned her blouse. Her heart thundered in her chest. She hesitated, but the baby's cries tugged at something far deeper than logic. The moment Amara's breast touched the child's cheek, Evelyn latched. Instinctively. Naturally. Desperately. The sucking was weak at first, but grew stronger, steadier. Her body relaxed. Her tiny fingers curled around the edge of Amara's shirt. Amara closed her eyes and exhaled, tears streaming down her cheeks. It wasn't just the baby being nourished, it was her too. The aching weight she'd carried in her chest, both physical and emotional, began to lighten. She stroked Evelyn's downy hair, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. I vais got you. I vais got you." She didn't hear the footsteps. She didn't hear the creak of the nursery door as it opened behind her. "Excuse-me," came a sharp, cold voice. Amara froze. She turned slowly, her heart dropping. Daniel Walker stood in the doorway. Immaculately dressed, every strand of his dark blonde hair in place, but his eyes, those ice-blue eyes, were wide with disbelief and rage. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked, stepping forward. Amara clutched the baby protectively. Her mouth went dry. She wouldn't eat. I tried the bottle. She was getting weaker. I didn't know what else to do." "You thought it was your place to breastfeed my daughter?" His voice was rising now, each word colder than the last. Amara swallowed. "I didn't mean, she was starving." Daniel's jaw clenched. "That is not your decision to make. She needed me." He stared at her, then at the sleeping child now nestled against her chest. Evelyn's lips still moved softly in her sleep, her cheeks pink with contentment. "Get out," he said after a moment, voice low and tight. "Now." Amara stood slowly, carefully easing the baby into her crib. She buttoned her blouse with shaking fingers, turned, and walked past him without another word. As she descended the stairs, every step echoed with doubt, fear, and guilt. But beneath it all, one quiet truth remained. She had saved that child's life. And somehow she knew, that moment would change everything. The hallway outside the nursery stretched endlessly before Amara as she descended, her legs unsteady beneath her. Every step away from the baby felt like a betrayal, of herself, of her grief, of something sacred that had just occurred between her and Evelyn. Her heart still pounded violently in her chest, her shirt damp and sticking to her skin, not just from milk, but from fear. Downstairs, the staff froze when they saw her. The butler, Mr. Harris, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. A housekeeper stopped mid-dusting, eyes wide. No one spoke, but the air grew thick with tension. Amara kept walking. She entered the back corridor leading to the laundry room and pushed open the small door to the service quarters. She sat on the bench, breathing hard, wiping the sweat and tears from her face with the hem of her apron. How had everything unraveled so fast? Just 10 minutes ago, she'd been holding Evelyn in her arms, giving her something no one else in the house could. And now, she was about to lose everything. She barely had time to gather her thoughts before the footsteps came, sharp, decisive, echoing through the polished hallway. The door opened. It was Kristen, the nanny. Her expression was unreadable. "He's calling for you," she said flatly. Amara's stomach twisted. "Is he going to fire me?"
Kristen hesitated. "I don't know."
But I'd prepare for the worst. The walk back up to the study felt longer than the first time. When she reached the office door, she paused. She could hear voices inside, Daniel speaking with someone on the phone, his tone clipped and angry. "She did what?" he was saying. "No, this is unacceptable. We're liable. I need her out before noon."
À col d'en grippe Tamara Espine. Kristen knocked. Silence fell inside the office.
After a moment, the door opened, and Daniel stood there, taller than she remembered, his expression blank. "Come in," he said. She obeyed. The office smelled like cedarwood and old books. Framed photos of Daniel and his late wife sat on a side table, Caroline, blonde and beaming, holding a newborn Evelyn in her arms, barely days old. That image, so full of light, stood in jarring contrast to the dark mood hanging over the room. Daniel motioned to a chair across from his desk. Amara sat, keeping her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. "I've already contacted the agency," he began. "They'll send someone to collect your things. I'm terminating your contract immediately." Amara nodded slowly, lips pressed into a thin line.
I understand.
"You crossed a line," he continued, voice cool. "You made a decision about my daughter's care that wasn't yours to make. You didn't ask. You didn't even inform me. You just acted." Amara took a deep breath. She was starving. "I tried the bottle."
She wouldn't take it. You weren't there.
"No one was. I panicked." "Then you should have called me. Or a doctor. Or the agency." "You don't just," he faltered for a second, then leaned back, exhaling sharply. "Do you understand the liability this creates? The media, if this got out." Her gaze flicked upward. "Is that what you're afraid of? The media?" He looked at her, startled. "I wasn't thinking about PR," she said, voice low. "I was thinking about a baby who was crying so hard she could barely breathe. I did what I thought any mother would do."
Daniel's expression hardened again.
"You are not her mother." No, Amara agreed softly. But I've lost a child. 3 months ago. His name was Micah. He lived 6 days.
Daniel blinked.
For a brief moment, his features shifted, something human breaking through the shell. He looked down, fingers tightening around the pen on his desk. I'm sorry, he said finally. It didn't sound practiced. It sounded real. Amara nodded, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. My body, it didn't stop producing milk. Even after he was gone.
Every morning I wake up soaked, ashing. Not just my body, my heart, my well-being.
Daniel was silent. She continued, her voice trembling. And today I heard that little girl cry, and I swear to you it wasn't a choice. It was instinct. I needed to do something. I couldn't let her suffer. The room filled with a heavy, unbearable quiet.
Daniel leaned forward.
Be that as it may, the risk of keeping you here outweighs any good intentions. You're dismissed. That's final.
Amara rose. Understood.
As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. I'll make sure you're compensated through the end of the month. She hesitated, then looked back.
I don't want your money, Monsieur Walker.
And then she was gone. Back in the service quarters, Amara packed her things in silence. Her duffel bag barely held more than a few changes of clothes and a framed photo of her and Micah, taken in the hospital, hours after his birth. He was swaddled, eyes closed, lips parted like he was about to speak. She stared at it for a long moment, her throat burning. Kristen reappeared, hovering awkwardly at the doorway. You really shouldn't have done it, she said quietly. You know how these people are. Amara didn't respond. Kristen shifted. I get it. The baby was suffering. But it's not our place. It never is. That's what this job teaches you. Amara zipped up her bag and slung it over her shoulder. Maybe that's the problem. Kristen looked away. As Amara walked out the back entrance for the last time, the late morning sun hit her face like a slap.
She squinted, blinking back the light and the tears.
She had no idea where she'd go next. No job. No income.
No one waiting for her.
But she had done what she believed was right. And somewhere inside that grand house, behind locked doors and sterile rooms, a baby was sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. That had to mean something. Even if the world would never see it that way. Amara didn't go home right away. The apartment she shared with her cousin on the west side of Atlanta suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too far from the place where everything had changed. Instead, she wandered the tree-lined streets near the Walker estate, unsure of her direction but unable to stop moving. By mid-afternoon, she found herself at Piedmont Park, seated on a shaded bench near the lake. Children played nearby, their laughter piercing through the fog of her thoughts. A young mother breastfed under a light shawl while her toddler tugged at her skirt.
The sight twisted something inside Amara's chest, sharp and familiar.
She looked down at her own hands.
Still trembling.
Still carrying the warmth of a child who wasn't hers. She could feel the ache building beneath her skin again, her body confused, as if asking, where is the baby? Why aren't we feeding her? It wasn't just hormonal. It was grief, wrapped in instinct, wrapped in something even deeper, an invisible thread connecting her to Evelyn, however briefly. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. A moment later, it buzzed again. Then again. When she finally pulled it out, she saw a string of missed calls and texts, from her cousin Brielle, from a friend at church, from a number she didn't recognize. She opened one of the texts. It was a link to a video. She pressed play. The grainy footage showed her from behind, sitting in the nursery, Evelyn at her breast. There was no sound, but the image was unmistakable. The clip then cut to Daniel entering the room, his face a mask of shock and anger. Subtitles filled the silence. You think this is your place? Get out. Now. The video ended there, less than a minute long, but enough. Amara's chest tightened. Someone had recorded them. Someone had leaked it. Her phone buzzed again.
Another message. Amara, you're all over Twitter. Are you okay?
She opened the app, barely able to type. Her name, full and clear, was trending. The hashtags ranged from cruel to sympathetic, hashtag fired for feeding, hashtag hero nanny, hashtag Hun's motherhood, Hashtag Daniel Walker scandal. She scrolled through comments, her heart pounding. That poor woman. She saved that baby. And this is how they treat her. White privilege at its finest. He can't handle a black woman stepping in where he failed. It's weird. Gross. Unprofessional. She crossed the line. She did what that baby's own father wouldn't.
She's a hero.
Amara's hand flew to her mouth. She couldn't breathe. Someone had turned her most vulnerable moment into a spectacle. Some saw her as a savior. Others, a villain. Either way, they were speaking about her, judging her, dissecting her motives, twisting her pain into content.
The phone rang again.
This time it was Brielle. Amara answered, her voice barely above a whisper. Hey.
Girl, are you okay?
I just saw the video. Who posted it?
No one knows.
Some think it was a staff member.
Doesn't matter.
It's viral. You're on the news.
Like, Actual Cable News. CNN ran a segment.
Fox too. Everyone's got an opinion. Amara stood, her legs wobbling. This isn't happening. It is. And Amara, it's not all bad. People are on your side. Celebrities are tweeting about you. There's even a GoFundMe someone started. I didn't ask for this, Amara snapped, louder than she meant to. Heads turned. She lowered her voice. I didn't do it for anyone but that baby. I know, Brielle said gently. But now everyone else knows too. Whether you like it or not. Back inside the Walker estate, Daniel sat in his study, staring at the paused frame of the video on his laptop screen. His face looked angrier than he remembered.
Archer.
The footage had been viewed over 3 million times in less than 12 hours. His publicist had already called twice. So had his attorney. A third call came from a close business partner, who warned him to control the narrative before it eats you alive. He slammed the laptop shut. He hadn't expected this. When he'd fired Amara, he'd felt justified, furious, yes, but also certain that what she did had crossed a boundary. It was a decision made from a place of protocol and fear. Of control. But now? He looked down at the baby monitor on his desk. Evelyn was sleeping, her chest rising and falling slowly. He hadn't held her once since Caroline's funeral. Hadn't fed her. Hadn't even tried. His gaze shifted to the corner of the room, where a framed photograph of Caroline smiled back at him. She had held Evelyn with such ease. Like the baby was a part of her own body. He thought of Amara in the rocking chair, Evelyn nestled at her breast. He'd been so blinded by fury, by the fear of what people would say, that he hadn't stopped to see what was right in front of him, his daughter safe, content, alive. And he'd thrown that woman out like she was nothing. He stood abruptly, knocking over a stack of files. He couldn't undo the damage. Not entirely. But maybe, just maybe, he could try to make it right. The next morning, Amara sat at her cousin's kitchen table, head bowed over a mug of untouched coffee. Her phone kept buzzing. She'd turned off notifications hours ago.
Knock came at the door.
Brielle looked up from her laptop. You expecting someone?
No.
Brielle opened the door. Daniel Walker stood there, looking out of place in jeans and a hoodie, a baby carrier in his arms. Amara's breath caught in her throat. He stepped inside without waiting to be invited, his eyes on her. I came to say I'm sorry. Brielle instinctively moved to block him.
Now you show up? After everything. Daniel raised a hand.
Please. Just give me 2 minutes. He turned to Amara, setting the carrier down gently on the table.
Evelyn blinked up at the light, her expression calme.
Daniel looked exhausted.
Un chagrin.
Human. I watched the video, he said. More times than I should admit. And I saw what I didn't let myself see that day.
You weren't overstepping.
You were saving her. Amara didn't speak.
Il let fear guide my decision.
Fear of appearances. Liability. Control. But you acted out of love.
Out of instinct.
I didn't thank you. I didn't ask if you were okay. I just threw you away. Amara finally looked him in the eyes. You didn't just throw me away. You made me feel like I was dangerous. Like I had no right to care. His expression softened. You did care. That's what makes this whole thing so painful. And what makes you so important. He reached into the carrier and lifted Evelyn gently into his arms. She hasn't slept like that since Caroline passed, he said quietly. Until that day. The day you held her. He looked at Amara. I don't expect forgiveness. But I do want to ask, if you'd consider coming back. Not as staff. Not as help. But as someone I trust, with my daughter's heart. Amara sat still, overwhelmed. Outside, the world continued to argue over her image. But in this room, something real, fragile, hesitant, but real, was beginning again. Amara didn't answer right away. She stared at Evelyn, now cooing softly in her father's arms, the baby's small hand reaching for the string on Daniel's hoodie. There was something heartbreakingly innocent in the way Evelyn moved, completely unaware of the chaos that had erupted in her name. Amara's throat felt dry. She wrapped her fingers around her coffee cup, though it had long gone cold. I don't know if I can go back, she said quietly. Daniel nodded, not pushing.
I understand.
No, I don't think you do, she continued, looking up at him.
You see what is happening out there?
This isn't just about your daughter anymore. People are turning me into something I never asked to be.
A symbole.
A scandal. A target. Daniel sat down across from her, still holding Evelyn. I never wanted that for you. But it happened, she said. And I don't even know who leaked the video. Someone in your house took that moment, my moment, and turned it into a headline.
À débattre.
I've had reporters waiting outside my cousin's building. Strangers sending me messages about morality and race and what kind of woman I am. Daniel looked down. I should have handled it differently.
I should have protected you. Amara let out a bitter log.
From what?
Your own stuff?
Your own reaction? You had me escorted out like I was a criminal. I was wrong, he said, his voice steady. I was angry. Afraid. And I didn't see the full picture until it was too late. There was a long pause. Brielle stood by the counter, arms crossed, watching them silently. Finally, she spoke. Maybe you should start by telling people the truth, she said, her eyes fixed on Daniel.
You veux got the resource.
The platform. And clearly, you care about your daughter. Use that. Daniel looked between the two women.
You're right.
Both of you. I've been hiding behind grief and excuses. But I'm done with that. He set Evelyn back in the carrier gently and stood. I'm going to make a statement. Public. Honest. And I won't do it unless you approve it first, he said, turning to Amara. You deserve that much. Amara studied him for a moment, weighing something invisible in the space between them. Then she nodded, slowly. All right. But I want it on my terms. My words. My voice. 2 days later, Amara sat in the green room of a national morning talk show studio in downtown Atlanta, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore a navy blouse and dark slacks, simple, unassuming but elegant. Her curls were pinned back, and her makeup was light. She looked calm. She didn't feel it. Outside the dressing room, camera crews moved about, prepping for the segment that had already been promoted across social media and television networks. The woman at the center of the viral breastfeeding video speaks out. Amara hated that title. But she had insisted that if they were going to tell her story, it would be hers to tell. The door opened. Daniel entered, dressed in a charcoal gray suit. He looked more rested than the last time she'd seen him, though his shoulders still carried the weight of grief. He gave her a nod. You ready? He asked.
Amara stood.
As I'll ever be. The studio lights were hot, the room colder than she expected. She and Daniel sat side by side on a couch across from the host, a woman named Camille Brooks, known for her calm demeanor and sharp interviewing style. As the countdown ended, Camille turned toward the camera and began. We've all seen the video. A moment captured inside the nursery of one of Atlanta's wealthiest families, an unexpected act of compassion that sparked a nationwide conversation. Today we're joined by Daniel Walker and Amara Johnson to talk about what really happened that day, and what it means moving forward. She turned to Amara. Ms. Johnson, thank you for being here. Amara nodded. Thank you for having me.
Camille leaned forward.
Can you take us back to that day, in your own words?
Amara inhaled slowly.
It started with a baby who wouldn't stop crying. I was there as a temporary housekeeper. The nanny had left the room, and I was alone with Evelyn. She was clearly hungry. I tried the bottle. Nothing worked. She was getting weaker by the minute, and I knew I could help. I still had milk. I'd lost my son just a few months before. My body never stopped producing. Camille's eyes softened. That must have been incredibly painful. Amara nodded. It was. And yet, holding Evelyn in that moment, feeding her, it was healing in a way I didn't expect. It didn't feel like crossing a line. It felt like answering a call. Camille turned to Daniel. Mr. Walker, what was your reaction when you walked in? Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. I was shocked. Angry. I saw someone breastfeeding my daughter without my permission. At the time, I couldn't see past that. I reacted harshly. I made decisions I now regret deeply. Camille looked between them. The public response has been intense, both support and criticism. What do you want people to take away from this?
Amara leaned forward.
I want people to see beyond the headlines. This wasn't about race, or class, or controversy. It was about a child in need.
About a moment of human connection.
If I'm being honest, I didn't expect the world to care. But since they do, I want them to care about the right things. Camille nodded slowly. And what are those things, in your view? Amara didn't hesitate. That too many mothers suffer in silence. That grief and motherhood and compassion don't always fit into neat categories. That sometimes doing the right thing looks wrong until you understand the whole story. Daniel added, and that healing often starts with humility. I failed my daughter when she needed me most. Amara stepped in, not for recognition, but out of love. She's not just a caregiver. She's a part of Evelyn's story now. And mine. The segment closed with silence in the studio, not the awkward kind, but the respectful kind. Camille thanked them both. As the cameras cut, the producer whispered to Camille, that's going to go viral too. In a good way. Later that afternoon, Amara sat with Brielle in the apartment, scrolling through her phone. This time, the comments were different. Her strength is incredible. I cried watching her speak. This woman deserves more than a thank you. Finally, a real conversation about motherhood, grief, and grace. The GoFundMe had reached over $70,000. A non-profit for maternal health had reached out. A publishing agent had contacted Brielle asking if Amara would consider writing a book. Amara was overwhelmed. She wasn't sure what to make of the attention. But for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like judgment. It felt like validation. Still, beneath the flurry of support and offers, one thought remained in her mind. What would Micah think of her now? She opened the photo of him she kept saved on her phone. His tiny face, peaceful and soft. She whispered under her breath, I'm trying, baby. I really am. And somehow, she felt that he knew. 3 days after the interview aired, Amara stood at her apartment window, watching the late afternoon sun stretch long shadows across the sidewalk below. The city hummed with its usual rhythm, cars, voices, music from an open window down the block, but her life no longer moved to that beat. The world outside had changed. Or rather, its view of her had. Since the broadcast, Amara had received hundreds of messages. Some heartfelt, others invasive. A few hateful. But the tone had shifted. People now saw her less as a mystery and more as a human being. Still, it was difficult to process being known for a moment that wasn't supposed to belong to anyone but her and Evelyn. The knock at the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. She peeked through the peephole. A man and a woman stood in the hallway, both in business attire, holding folders. Not reporters, at least not obvious ones. She opened the door cautiously. Ms. Johnson? The woman asked, offering a warm smile.
I'm Dr. Selena Grayson.
This is my colleague, Andrew Foster. We're with the Atlanta Center for Maternal Support.
Do you have a moment to talk? Amara blinked.
I sure.
Come in.
They stepped inside, professional but respectful, scanning the small living room without judgment. Brielle had tidied that morning, but the modest space still bore the marks of two lives balancing between struggle and resilience, folded laundry on the couch, baby books on the coffee table, a half-used box of tissues. Selena gestured to a seat. We won't take much of your time.
Oui, ça your interview.
It moved a lot of us. You've sparked conversations that professionals in this field have been trying to start for years. Amara folded her hands in her lap. I didn't mean to start anything. That's often how change begins, Andrew said. Accidentally. Honestly.
Selena leaned forward.
We're launching a new program, Milk Bridges. It connects mothers who've lost children but still produce milk with neonatal units and mothers in need. It's about support, dignity, and honoring grief by giving it purpose. We'd like you to be the face of it.
Amara sat still.
The face? She asked. You don't have to speak on stage or do anything uncomfortable, Selena said quickly. You'd be a symbol of healing. A voice that makes others feel less alone.
I'm not a celebrity.
You're something better, Andrew replied.
You're real.
Amara looked out the window again, her thoughts a storm of uncertainty. How did you even find me? Selena smiled. Your cousin Brielle posted an update on social media. She mentioned you were interested in helping other mothers. We reached out to her directly.
Amara exhaled.
It's a lot. All of this. 1 minute I was folding sheets in someone's guest bedroom, and now. You're building something, Selena said gently.
Something bigger than one moment.
Amara didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. That evening, Daniel stood in Evelyn's nursery, rocking her gently as the night settled in outside the tall windows. Her breathing was slow, steady, her head nestled against his chest. He'd come a long way in just a few weeks. He changed diapers now. Mixed formula without help. Learned to interpret her cries, wet, hungry, sleepy, overstimulated. There were still moments of clumsiness, but less fear. The video had changed things for him too. His image took a hit, yes. Several sponsors had backed out of upcoming development projects. His publicist warned that public sentiment would take months to recover. But Daniel wasn't concerned with recovery in the professional sense anymore. For the first time in his life, he was more interested in being whole than being respected. He looked at the rocking chair in the corner. The one where Amara had once sat. He hadn't moved it. He still thought about her often. Her strength. Her grief. Her instinct. She hadn't agreed to return to the estate, and he hadn't pressed. He understood now that trust couldn't be forced. It had to be rebuilt with time and action.
Evelyn stirred.
Daniel adjusted his hold, murmuring softly. It's okay, he whispered.
I've got you.
The words felt familiar.
Echo of Amara's voice.
He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing with certainty. Amara had changed both their lives. And in doing so, she'd changed his understanding of fatherhood itself. By the end of the week, Amara stood in the neonatal unit of a downtown hospital, surrounded by tiny incubators and the rhythmic beeping of machines. She wore a visitor's badge and carried a small insulated bag filled with carefully labeled milk containers. She'd agreed to meet the Milk Bridges team for a quiet tour, no cameras, no press. Just a chance to see what her story was already helping build. A nurse led her to a window where several premature infants slept in their tiny pods, their skin translucent, their bodies barely larger than a doll's. One of them, the nurse explained, had been born at 26 weeks. His mother couldn't produce milk due to complications from emergency surgery. This child is alive today because of donor milk, the nurse said. You helped bring more attention and supply than we've ever had. Amara stared through the glass, her heart aching in that complex way she was slowly learning to live with. I didn't think I had anything left to give, she said softly. Turns out I did. Selena appeared beside her, offering a clipboard. We're expanding the program, she said. Other cities want to replicate it. We're getting calls from Boston, Chicago, even Los Angeles. Amara took the clipboard, her fingers brushing over the letterhead. Are you asking me to travel?
Selena looked.
No. Not yet. Just to help us shape the vision. Maybe speak at a conference this fall, if you're ready. Amara considered it. For the first time, the idea didn't terrify her. I'll think about it. That night, back at the apartment, Amara scrolled through an email from the nonprofit's director, outlining future initiatives. As she read, a new message popped up in her inbox. It was from Daniel.
Subject, Evelyn. Yamara.
Just wanted to say thank you again. Evelyn took her first roll over today. I recorded it and thought you might like to see it. A part of that moment belongs to you. Attached was a short video clip. Evelyn lay on her blanket, eyes wide, arms flailing. With a determined grunt, she rolled over for the first time. Off camera, Daniel's voice let out a surprised laugh. You did it, baby girl. Amara smiled, tears pooling quietly in her eyes. She hit reply. Thank you for sharing. Tell her I'm proud of her. Then she sat back, phone resting in her lap, and whispered aloud to the quiet room. I'm proud of me too. The conference center in downtown Atlanta was larger than Amara had imagined. She stood backstage, clutching a slim folder of speaking notes, though she knew she wouldn't need them. She'd rehearsed every word. Not because she'd planned to, but because they'd lived inside her long enough. Outside the curtain, rows of chairs filled with faces from across the country.
Nurse, doctor, social workers, doula, mother.
Some had flown in from as far as New York and California. Others were local. All of them were here for the same reason, to talk about maternal care, grief, community, and healing. Milk Bridges had grown faster than anyone predicted. Within a few short months, it had partnerships with 3 major hospital systems and over 200 approved milk donors. The story of the woman who'd breastfed a stranger's child had become more than a moment, it had become a movement. Amara was no longer just a name in a headline. She was a voice in a conversation many were desperate to have. Brielle appeared beside her, dressed professionally, her phone in hand. She had taken a more active role in the nonprofit than she ever expected, managing outreach and media coordination. You're up next, she said, squeezing Amara's shoulder. They're ready for you. Amara nodded. She took one final breath and stepped through the curtain. The applause began before she spoke. Not loud, but respectful. Acknowledging. She walked to the podium slowly, not smiling, but not nervous either. 3 months ago, she began, I was a part-time housekeeper grieving the loss of my son.
Yad milk in my body and a all in Mayat.
I thought I had nothing left to give. The room quieted. People leaned forward. And then, in a moment I never planned and wouldn't have chosen, I found myself holding a baby who wasn't mine.
A baby crying from un jet.
Alone. And in that moment, I did what my body knew to do. I fed her. She paused, eyes scanning the room. I didn't know someone was watching. I didn't know the world would find out. But it did. And what followed was a storm I never asked for, a storm filled with praise and criticism, with kindness and cruelty. And through all of it, I kept asking myself, did I do the right thing? She looked down for a second, then back up. I know the answer now. I did. Not because it was easy. Not because it was popular. But because it was human. And I believe that's what we're all here to talk about today, how to make space for humanity in systems that too often forget it. More heads nodded now. Some in tears. We have mothers dying in delivery rooms, families isolated by shame, grief buried beneath silence. But we also have each other. And we have stories. Stories that remind us we're not alone. That pain shared can become power. That milk given can be love extended. She took a breath. I didn't come here to be a hero. I came here because I survived. And because somewhere out there, another woman is sitting in a hospital bed with aching arms and nowhere to put her love. We owe her something better than silence. The applause this time was louder. Sustained. Amara stepped away from the podium, heart pounding, throat tight. She didn't know what she expected to feel, but what came was peace. Backstage, Brielle hugged her tightly. You did that, she whispered. You just changed somebody's life. Later that evening, after the last panel and the closing remarks, Amara stood in the hotel lobby, sipping water and speaking with a pediatric nurse from Chicago who'd driven 12 hours to attend the conference. I've been doing this work for 20 years, the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. But what you said, it reminded me why I started. Thank you. Amara smiled gently, humbled. I'm glad it mattered. Just then, a soft voice called from behind her.
MS Johnson?
Amara turned. A woman stood there, mid-40s, olive skin, dark circles under her eyes. She held a bundled infant in a carrier across her chest. Her body language was cautious, almost unsure. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, the woman began. But I needed to thank you. My daughter's alive because of this program. She was born at 28 weeks. I couldn't nurse. They said she might not survive without donor milk. And then, they told me your milk had helped. Amara froze. My milk? She asked quietly. The woman nodded. I know it's anonymous. But they told me later, just in passing, that part of her early feedings came from your donation. I wanted you to meet her. She unfastened the top of the carrier slightly. The infant inside was tiny but alert, blinking up with wide, curious eyes. Amara felt her knees weaken. She crouched down slowly, reaching a tentative hand toward the baby. She's beautiful, she whispered. She's here because of you, the woman said. I know we're strangers, but I think about you every day. Amara blinked rapidly, trying to stay composed. Thank you for telling me. That means more than you know. They stood in quiet reverence for a moment. Then the woman pressed a folded note into Amara's hand. I wrote you something. In case I got too nervous to speak. Then she was gone. Amara opened the note later in her hotel room. It was handwritten, simple, and raw. Dear Amara, I lost my sister last year in childbirth. When I was pregnant, I was terrified. Then my baby came early.
I blamed myself.
I didn't know how to ask for help. But your milk, your story, reminded me I wasn't alone. You turned your pain into something that touched my family. I hope you keep going.
The world need you. Moder like me need you.
With gratitude.
Jenna and Baby Lucia.
Amara pressed the note to her chest and lay back on the bed, tears slipping silently down her face. This, she thought, is what healing feels like.
Not forgetting. Not moving on.
But seeing your sorrow bloom into something someone else can hold. The next morning, as she prepared to check out of the hotel, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Daniel. We're having Evelyn's first birthday celebration next month. Just a few people. Low key.
I'd love for you to come.
She asks about you now. Says your name when she sees the rocking chair. Amara smiled, fingers hovering over the reply. She wasn't sure if she was ready to return to the house where it all began. But maybe she didn't need to be ready. Maybe she just needed to say yes. The Walker estate looked different in the late afternoon light.
Softé somo.
Less imposing. The iron gate still stood tall and dignified, but the path that had once felt cold and formal now seemed quieter, almost welcoming. Amara sat in her car for a few minutes before stepping out. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, steady but hesitant. It had been months since she'd walked through those doors. Since that moment in the nursery when instinct and grief had collided. The memory still lived in her chest, not as pain anymore, but as a permanent echo of transformation. She smoothed the front of her dress, a simple cream fabric that caught the breeze, and made her way up the familiar stone steps. She rang the bell before she had a chance to reconsider. The door opened and Daniel stood there, not in a suit, but in jeans and a t-shirt with flour smudged on the sleeve. He smiled, a bit nervously. You came, he said. I said I would. Still, I wasn't sure. They stood awkwardly for a beat before he stepped aside. Come in. The house smelled like cinnamon and something sweet. Somewhere in the distance, laughter echoed, soft, childish, unmistakably Evelyn's. Amara stepped into the foyer, pausing briefly. The space looked the same, but it felt different. Warmer. Less polished. A toy or two peeked out from under a hallway bench. A framed finger painting sat propped on a side table. Daniel noticed her glance. She paints now. If you can call smearing colors paint. It's beautiful, Amara said. They walked toward the kitchen, where several guests mingled over appetizers and drinks. Most were close friends, neighbors, and a few colleagues. No media. No fanfare. Just a quiet celebration of a child's first year. Brielle was there too, helping plate cupcakes. She waved when she saw Amara and came over to hug her. She's been asking for you, she said. Every time she sees your picture.
My picture.
Daniel pointed toward the family room. Above the mantel, alongside framed photos of Evelyn's first steps and Caroline's smiling face, was a candid shot of Amara holding Evelyn in the rocking chair, the one moment no camera had captured until later, when Daniel printed a still from the home monitor. Amara stared at it. "I wasn't sure if you'd mind," he said, "but I wanted her to grow up knowing that love has many faces." Amara didn't respond. Instead, she looked around the room again, more carefully this time. No one seemed uncomfortable by her presence. If anything, a few guests smiled warmly, some even nodding as if they already knew her. Word had spread, clearly. A voice called out from behind them. "Mama G." Amara turned. Evelyn toddled across the hardwood floor in a light blue dress, arms outstretched, cheeks flushed with excitement.
Daniel stepped back, letting the moment unfold. Amara knelt just in time to catch the little girl in her arms.
"Hi there," she whispered, kissing her forehead. Evelyn clung to her tightly, babbling excitedly about cupcakes and balloons. Her curls smelled like baby shampoo. Her hands were sticky with frosting. "She talks about you constantly," Daniel said softly. "I think in her own way she remembers." Amara felt tears threaten the edges of her eyes, but she held them back. Not from pride. From peace. They moved out to the backyard where a few tables were set up under string lights. The sun had just begun to dip, and the sky glowed a soft orange. At the center of the yard, Evelyn's cake sat on a small table, white with pastel decorations, a single candle waiting to be lit. Daniel stood beside the cake with Evelyn in his arms and cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming today," he said. "This year has been a journey. One I couldn't have imagined. And I wouldn't have gotten through it without a lot of help." He looked at Amara. "Some of that help came in unexpected ways. From people who didn't owe me anything. People who acted not out of duty, but out of love." Amara felt the weight of his gaze, but also its gentleness. "So today isn't just Evelyn's birthday. It's a celebration of every person who kept her safe, warm, loved. And we're grateful to all of you." He helped Evelyn lean forward and blow out the candle. Applause followed, and the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. Later, as twilight settled in, Amara sat on the back patio, sipping a glass of lemonade. The house behind her buzzed with the quiet joy of a gathering that didn't demand perfection. Daniel joined her with 2 plates of cake. He handed her one and sat. "She's going to start daycare next month," he said. "Already?" "She's ready," he smiled. "Me? Not so much."
Amara looked.
There was a comfortable pause between them. No tension. No unspoken grief pressing between their words. "I've been thinking," Daniel said. "You once told me you didn't want my money. That you just wanted to help. But what if you helped, officially?" She looked at him, confused. "I've started a new foundation," he explained. "Inspired by Milk Bridges, but broader. Support for parents dealing with sudden loss. Transitional care for grieving families. I want you to be part of it. Leadership, if you're open to it." Amara raised an eyebrow. "Leadership? I'm not asking you to run the whole thing. Just help shape it. Give it a voice. Your voice."
Amara hésitated.
"You really think people will listen to me?" "I know they will." She looked down at her hands, fingers trailing the rim of her glass. "That day in your house. I thought I'd ruined everything. That I'd never find peace again." "You didn't ruin anything," Daniel said.
"You changed everything."
She looked back at him. "I'll think about it." He nodded.
D'être salé à ce point.
As the sky turned dark and the backyard filled with fireflies, Evelyn ran up once more, climbing onto Amara's lap with a tired yawn. Her small body relaxed instantly. Amara wrapped her arms around the child, who nestled her head against her chest. For the first time in what felt like years, Amara didn't feel like a guest. She felt like she belonged. A week after the party, Amara returned to the Walker estate, not as a guest, and not as staff, but as something that didn't yet have a name. The invitation had been casual. Daniel had texted her late one night.
"Evelyn keeps asking when Mama J is coming back.
No pressure, but we're making waffles Sunday morning.
Open door."
She hadn't answered right away. Not because she was unsure, but because she wanted to be sure of herself. She'd spent months learning how to rebuild her identity after loss. Stepping into someone else's life again, even partially, meant reopening doors she wasn't sure she wanted open. But the idea of breakfast, of laughter in a sunlit kitchen, of Evelyn in pajamas reaching for her, it called to something soft and sacred inside her. She knocked once before letting herself in. The house smelled like vanilla and melted butter. She followed the sound of sizzling batter to the kitchen, where Daniel stood over the stovetop, spatula in hand, barefoot and relaxed in a black hoodie. "You made it," he said, glancing over his shoulder with a smile. "I told you I would. I still wasn't sure." She laughed, setting down her bag. "You should stop doubting me." Evelyn sat in her high chair, hair wild with sleep, syrup already smeared across her cheeks. When she saw Amara, her eyes lit up.
Mama j'ai.
Amara crossed the room and leaned down to kiss the girl's forehead.
Good morning, sunshine.
"Did you save me a waffle?" Evelyn grinned and held up a piece, sticky and half-eaten. Amara accepted it with a mock gasp of delight.
Daniel slid a fresh plata cross secunte. Yuri swarm.
They ate around the kitchen island, the morning light spilling across the counters, the kind of quiet that felt chosen rather than empty. After breakfast, Evelyn toddled off with a crayon and a sheet of paper, content to draw on the tile floor while the adults sipped coffee.
Daniel leaned against the kunte, arms crossed. You've been quiet.
"I've been thinking," Amara said, "about your offer."
The foundation.
He nodded.
I meant it, you know.
"I know. That's why I'm saying yes."
Daniel's eyes widened slightly.
"Yeah. I want to help," she continued. "Not just in theory. Not as a figurehead. I want to build something real. Programs for families who fall through the cracks.
Grief circle.
Training for hospital staff on how to talk to mothers who lose children. There's so much we could do." A slow smile spread across his face. "Then let's do it." Amara reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder. "I started drafting a structure. I spoke with Selena and a few people from Milk Bridges. They want to collaborate." Daniel took the folder, flipping through the pages, impressed.
You really don't do anything halfway, do you?
"Not when it matters." Evelyn walked over, clutching her drawing, a lopsided heart surrounded by stick figures. She pointed at one of them. "That's me," she declared. "And that's Daddy. And that's Mama J." Amara felt her chest tighten. "I love it." Daniel looked at her. "You know, she came up with that on her own."
Mama J.
"We never taught her to call you that." Amara nodded slowly. She needed a name for what I am to her. Something that fit.
Does it fit for you?
She didn't answer right away. Instead, she folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into her bag. "It does." They moved into the living room, where Evelyn climbed onto the couch and curled into Amara's side, already beginning to doze off. Daniel sat across from them, quiet.
Amara glanced around the room.
It had once felt like a place she didn't belong. Now the furniture was the same, but the atmosphere had shifted. There were blankets tossed over chairbacks, framed drawings on the wall, an open picture book on the coffee table. It wasn't a showroom anymore. It was a home. And yet, there was still an unspoken question between them. Something that lingered in the air like the final note of a song. Daniel cleared his throat.
Do you think you'll ever want more?
Amara looked at him. More what? More than this. More than just Evelyn. More than visits. More than work. The question hovered in the space between them, not heavy, but careful. Amara took her time. "I think," she said slowly, "that for the first time in a long while, I'm not rushing to define anything. I'm letting things be what they are."
And this, whatever this is, it matters to me.
Daniel nodded.
It matters to me too.
They sat in silence after that, the kind that needed no explanation. Eventually, Evelyn stirred and looked up. "Can Mama J stay tonight?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That's up to her." Amara looked down at the child in her arms, then at the man sitting across from her. She smiled. Maybe just this once. Later that night, after Evelyn was tucked into bed and the dishes were done, Amara stood at the edge of the nursery, watching the child sleep. The soft hum of the white noise machine filled the air. Daniel stood beside her. "She won't remember most of this," he said. "She'll remember the feeling," Amara replied. "Of being safe. Of being loved." Daniel looked at her, his voice quiet. "So will I." Amara turned to him. "Then let's keep giving her that." She didn't know what the future held. Whether it would include new titles, new roles, or just a continuation of the unspoken rhythm they'd found. But she knew this much. She was no longer just someone passing through. She had a seat at the table now. And that was enough. Autumn arrived slowly in Atlanta, softening the air with cooler mornings and golden leaves scattered across sidewalks. The trees around the Walker estate began their slow shift into amber and rust, and Evelyn, now confidently running instead of toddling, took to collecting fallen leaves in a small canvas bag like treasures from the earth itself. Amara watched her from the kitchen window, a mug of tea warming her hands. It had been nearly 2 months since the birthday party, 2 months since she said yes to the foundation, yes to a new rhythm, yes to something unspoken between her and Daniel that had yet to be defined, but grew stronger with each passing day. The foundation, officially named the Micah Project in honor of her late son, had launched with quiet determination. What started as a few shared ideas scribbled in a folder had become a real operation. Offices, staff, partners, and a growing network of families and professionals eager to fill the gaps in maternal grief care and early childhood support. Amara found herself working longer hours than expected, not because she had to, but because every meeting, every call, every mother she spoke with reminded her that the pain she carried had not been in vain. Micah's name lived on, not as a tragedy, but as a legacy of comfort and connection. She never imagined herself here. Not long ago, she was folding sheets in a stranger's home, still bleeding from loss, still unsure if she would ever find her footing again. Now she stood in that same home, barefoot settled, not as staff, not quite as guest, but as someone who belonged in ways that weren't always spoken aloud. Daniel entered the kitchen from the back patio, his hands dusty from helping Evelyn dig a hole for what she called her very important leaf collection. He brushed off his jeans and poured himself coffee. "Groundbreaking ceremony went well," he said. "We might even be ahead of schedule." "Look at you," Amara teased, getting sentimental about timelines. He smiled. "Hard not to, when the building will have your son's name on it." Her expression softened. "It still catches me off guard sometimes. Seeing his name on a sign. Hearing it in meetings. It's like he exists again, just in a different way." "He does," Daniel said.
Trop you. Trop 10.
They stood in a comfortable silence, watching Evelyn chase a squirrel across the yard, squealing with laughter. "She's changed, hasn't she?" Amara asked. Daniel nodded.
She look more. Sleep better.
"Talks constantly." "She's rooted now."
So are you.
Amara sipped her tea. "Maybe I am."
Daniel leaned against the counter.
"I've been thinking about something." She glanced at him. "That sounds dangerous." He chuckled, then grew serious.
You've built a life here.
One that started from pain, but grew into purpose. And I think it's time we name it. Not label it, not define it in ways that trap us. But acknowledge what it's become. Amara raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said carefully, "that Evelyn already calls you Mama J. She already sees you as part of her world. And I do too. You've been here for us in ways no one else has."
Not out of obligation, but out of love.
"I don't want to keep living in a gray area. I want to offer something more permanent. If not marriage, then at least, family in the truest sense of the word." Amara studied him, her heart steady but alert. She had wondered if this conversation would come. Feared it, even. Not because she didn't care, but because part of her had learned to distrust anything that resembled permanence. She placed her mug down slowly. "I've spent a lot of time rebuilding myself.
Brick by brick.
And I like what I've made.
I like where I stand. What I'm giving Evelyn.
What I'm giving others. And yes, I care about you. Deeply. But I don't want to be folded into someone else's picture just because the pieces seem to fit." Daniel didn't flinch. "I wouldn't ask you to."
She stepped closer.
"I want to build something with you, Daniel. Not fall into something that already exists. If this, us, this home, this work, is a house, then I want my hands on the blueprints. He nodded slowly. Then we design it together. She smiled. Deal. Later that week, they began making small changes around the house. Not symbolic ones, but practical ones. A second toothbrush in the bathroom. A drawer in the kitchen labeled Jay's stuff. Evelyn drew a new family picture for the fridge, this time with a son in the top corner and all three of them holding hands. Brielle visited for dinner on Saturday night and laughed at the sight. I leave you alone for 2 months and now there's a chalkboard schedule, color-coded fridge magnets, and a foundation office down the block, she joked. Amara grinned.
What can I say?
I'm nesting. Brielle pulled her aside later, as they washed dishes together. Are you happy? She asked softly. Amara paused, letting the question sink in. I think I'm finally allowed to be. You always were. I didn't believe it then. But now? Now I wake up and there's a purpose waiting for me.
A child who love me. A man who respect me.
A project that honors my son. It's not perfect. But it's real. And that's more than I ever hoped for.
Brielle smiled.
I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me too. As the evening settled and the house grew quiet, Amara stepped into Evelyn's room, brushing a stray curl from her forehead as the child slept. She thought of Micah. Of the hospital. Of the woman she had been. The woman who nearly disappeared beneath the weight of loss. She was still her. But now she was something more. She was a mother, twice over.
On signe grief. On signe grâce.
And for the first time in her life, she knew the difference. The winter sun filtered gently through the nursery windows, casting long pale beams across the hardwood floor. Evelyn, now nearly 2, slept curled under a knitted blanket, her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked close beneath her chin. Amara stood quietly in the doorway, watching the steady rise and fall of the little girl's chest. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was full of time, of memory, of everything they'd been through to arrive here. Downstairs, the house was quiet. Daniel had taken a call in the study, something about zoning permits for a new affordable housing project he was launching in tandem with the Micah project. Amara had just returned from another Milk Bridges partnership meeting, this one with a hospital in New Orleans. Her schedule had filled up quickly over the past few months, yet somehow, the pace no longer overwhelmed her. She had found her rhythm. It was a rhythm of presence, of building in the day and being rooted in the night. Of speaking on stages and then tucking a child into bed. Of grief that still visited her sometimes, in quiet hours and unexpected moments, but no longer dictated her life. She stepped into the nursery, careful not to wake Evelyn, and picked up one of the scattered picture books on the floor. It was the same one she had read to her the night before, when Evelyn had insisted on holding her hand until she drifted off. Mama J, she had whispered, half asleep.
You stay forever.
Amara hadn't answered in that moment. She hadn't wanted to promise something she didn't fully understand. But now, standing there in the soft morning light, she realized she had already answered the question, in her actions, in her presence, in the way her life had grown to wrap itself around this child. She sat in the rocking chair, the one Daniel had never moved, the one that had silently witnessed the turning point of everything. She rocked slowly, letting herself remember. Not to reopen the wound, but to honor it. Micah's name was spoken more often now. Within the foundation, in meetings, at events. But most importantly, in their home. Evelyn knew who he was. She called him Brother Star, after the small golden star Amara wore around her neck. At night, she would point at the sky and whisper, "Good night, Brother Star," the way Amara once whispered to the ceiling of a hospital room alone. Loss remained, but not as a whole. As a thread. It wove through her life, through every act of compassion, through every program she helped shape, through every mother who found solace in what she had once thought was unbearable. She looked out the window. A dusting of snow had begun to fall, soft and slow, quieting the world. Behind her, footsteps approached. Daniel appeared in the doorway, watching her with that quiet attentiveness he'd grown into. He didn't interrupt. Just leaned against the frame and waited. She turned to him. "She asked me last night if I'd stay forever." He smiled, stepping closer. "And what did you say?" "I didn't. But I think I have." He nodded. "You have." They stood together, looking down at Evelyn, the child whose arrival had cracked both of their lives open, him with loss, her with instinct, and somehow from that fracture, they'd built something whole. Daniel sat on the floor beside the rocking chair, arms resting on his knees. The Micah project got its federal grant this morning, he said. 3-year funding, with full community programming.
Amara exhaled slowly.
That's incredible. They want you to testify next month in D.C., if you're willing.
Tell your story.
Explain why it matters. I'll go, she said.
Note formeux.
For every woman who thinks she has to grieve alone. He nodded again. You know, he said, you never told me how you'd describe what we are.
Note tous public. Just to yourself.
She looked down at him, thinking. I think, she began slowly, we are not a conventional family. We didn't start with vows or planning or any kind of blueprint. We started with an emergency. A child who needed both of us. And somehow through that we became something. Something solid, he said. Something real, she added. Love that doesn't need a name to be true. Daniel reached for her hand. She let him hold it. No matter what people see from the outside, he said, this right here, this quiet, this room, this moment, is the truth. She nodded. Then let's keep telling it. Later that night, Amara wrote a letter. Not to be published. Not for anyone else to read. Just for herself. Dear Micah.
You said to wonder if he ever stop feeling like he lost you.
The truth is, I haven't.
He never will.
But what's changed is what I do with that loss. I carry you with me now, not as a wound, but as a compass. Every time I hold Evelyn, every time I help a mother say her child's name aloud without shame, you are there. Your brief life made mine more honest. And because of that, I've found a life worth living again.
Not perfect.
Not always easy. But deeply, undeniably mine. I love you.
I'll always love you.
Mom. She folded the paper, slid it into a small box where other memories of Micah lived, bracelets, hospital tags, tiny socks that had never been worn. Then she turned off the light, stepped into the hallway, and walked toward the future she never could have imagined, but one she had chosen, piece by piece. In the stillness, Evelyn stirred, her voice soft and sleepy from behind the door.
Mama, j'ai.
Amara returned to her side. I'm here. A pause. Then you stayed. Amara smiled, brushing a hand across the child's forehead.
You always will.